welcome to Regaining the Balance. My name is Matt, and today we are going to be talking about the destruction of Rome. Ancient Rome, who knows? I've always wondered what in the world could have actually destroyed Rome, considering I'm looking at these buildings of stone and granite and marble and just massive ancient architecture that is I don't buy that you can burn down these types of buildings. Yes, you can burn down the inside of them, things like that, but outside of that, like, you can't really burn down these buildings. Like, what, how in the world do these buildings get destroyed in the way that they do? And I don't think it's marauding invaders, because why would you spend extra time tearing down buildings? I mean, you do have examples of that kind of stuff throughout history where an invasion comes down and they destroy a temple or whatever else, block by block to erase it. That just seems like a colossal waste of time, especially with some of these gigantic, huge buildings. Like, why in the world would you bother doing that? If you invade something, then you kind of want to take over what you invaded rather than destroy it. But that's just my sense. Spoils of war and whatnot. So, I think that the documents that I'll be reading out to you guys today are going to be a huge clue as to the real destruction of Rome and when did it really all happen. And I think I found out. And these two documents really describe what really truly seems like the destruction of Rome, and by a flood, because a flood, major floods or tsunamis or things like that. I mean, water really just takes things out like nothing else, truly, other than the wind, which is, if when it's that high, is usually accompanied with water. So, we have to keep that in mind, that when we're looking at these places and these ruins, and the fact that they're not even that well excavated, and that they're still covered in dirt. We have to keep these things in mind, because these aren't man-made situations that are happening here. This is something else, and I gotta say that I think we've really hit on something very important here. Today we have a very special video for you guys. Not just a video, but a scholastic endeavor, let's just say, in finding really old documents, books, in Middle French, in a Gothic style calligraphy, that talk about one of the worst floods in ever recorded in Rome, supposedly dated in 1530. Now, who knows about the date and whatever else? We're going to see just how many strange things are that we can pull out of this, particularly actually two documents talking about the same flood. So, without further ado, I think I'm going to go ahead and just read the whole translation for you guys first, and then after that, we're going to do a breakdown analysis of the translation. Okay? So, the first document is called The Terrible Deluge that occurred in the noble city in the town of Rome, with the great processions made by our saint and our saint father the Pope. The pardons and jubilee which is given to those who confess, considering the dangers of the flood for the poor people. It has no author. Translated by myself and my wife. Okay, and of course this translation will be placed in the description box, as will all the other links we have here. Prestigious and devout Christians, redeem some precious blood from our Savior Jesus. Consider the ruins and clues from God sent to the town of not not legible in the country of Flanders and other sites. Quando caputo and blah blah blah. There's a Latin phrase talking about something that Saint Jerome said. His Excellency Saint Gregory declares, who signifies these various deluges, I guess, and signs that also happen in the said town of Rome are said in this manner: in the redemption of the sins of the world may vanish, so evil is denounced. And then Latin phrase, which could not translate accurately, so I'm not including it. For what we must prepare and hear, the Savior said in Latin, we did do this one. He says, "Be ye ready, because you know not the day nor the hour." I mean, I think that's true of all life. This small introduction and subsequent matter of the procession and forgiveness given by the Holy Father, the Pope, to all who confess, when we receive the precious body of our Savior, that our Holy Father, the Pope, seeing that so many poor Christians died with the flood, and he would see the bodies of the Christians and would give advice as to when to dispose of them, thus to establish processions, fasting, and prayer in the following manner. On the first Wednesday, this minority are in prayers, orations, and fasting, and there was made a general procession through the town of Rome universally through the amendment of our Holy Father. He who assembled all the ecclesiastic colleges in order to assist in the said procession, and the proud church committee and relics. Likely on Thursday, our Holy Father, the Pope, Commander-in-Chief, ordered a general procession where pardons were given, as well as indulgences of different kinds, and repentance. Everybody did their duty to the best of their ability because they didn't expect either the great mercy of God or the great dangers that were going to happen. Never had we seen the dangers of the very high waters cause such destruction. True is that of the time of the last Pope Alexander, the floods were so high that several houses were destroyed and washed into the Tiber. But this time the flood was higher than a spear, higher than before, and even during the time of Pope Alexander they had marked a marble stone on the tower of the castle, and this time the waters were more than a spear higher from this mark. Moreover, our Holy Father the Pope, always preserving, made the general procession happen, because nobody's astrology had planned or foreseen the earthquake that was about to happen in this town. Because nobody's astrology had planned or foreseen the earthquake that was about to happen in this town. Then follows the order of procession by our Holy Father, the Pope, and the cardinals and the people of the church. In the mornings of Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, there was assembled ecclesiastic men and religious dignitaries of Franciscan, Jacobins, and other beggars as at one of the churches in Rome, and did a general procession, in which the procession were the ecclesiastic officers as well as the cardinals, archbishops, and bishops, and that the secularists were put under the order of their rank and office. Not only these 3 days, but also the subsequent days the procession was going on, as well as fasting prayer to mitigate. And then there's a little bit of a break here because either the person who wrote this, and you'll see this because it'll be on screen, but the person who wrote this, either they changed just their spacing, so it kind of changed their letter structure because the calligraphy seems different, or it's in a completely different handwriting. So, you make a distinction on your own. Sire of our, I think it's Savior, no, Sire of our Savior Jesus, because of all the ill that was done by the river, it is not possible to declare only the damages that were done by the said Tiber. The wines that were in the canteens were all lost. In Latin, there's a lot of doubt around the events of the year. Then came a multitude of damage done by the Tiber. First of all, to know how such a flood came so suddenly, you must know that it started on the Saturday of the 8th of November, 1530, at midnight. The Tiber flooded so intensely that all the bodies of the waters flooded over to cover the entire city of Rome, and thus started that said day until the following Sunday, with the great multitude of water that rose to the first floor of the houses. The whole city was still so full of mud and debris that you could not pass the streets of Rome. They are less scared of the houses that could potentially fall down than they are of the large beams of wood that we use that are just lying on the ground. Due to the water rising, it entered the cantinas and destroyed all the goods. Damages the foundations of all the said city. We feel a little bit of pity for those who died, suffocated or drowned in the said city of Rome, and for those great figures who were surprised in their houses. Let's consider as well the loss of writings like records and other papers that were lost from the secretaries and prosecutors, like my Lord Eusebius, whose house melted into an abyss twice as deep as the foundation. Bread was desperately needed, and those who had meat on their bones were forced to eat without bread because the water destroyed and took away the mills except for 3 or 4 of them. By the grace of God, let us keep such well deserved inconveniences and in our present life know the glory of paradise that is prepared for his good friends. Amen. Created in Rome, the 12th of November, 1530. Now, uh, I'll go to the next one and then we'll start to take a closer look at both of these letters. This one is titled Copy of Letters of the Terrible Deluge that Came to the Noble City of Rome since the 7th of October, 1530. Now, this letter is like a compilation of various accounts from other letters that these bankers, these French bankers, put together and published into a book. I, conqueror of subtle inscription, I am foreseeing something, but it is difficult, inventing and proposing as right, as I hear per reason and right, a case of an accident of unforeseen circumstances, or a divine ploy that came to the city of Rome. Key and chief of this world that fears mischief, but God reigns in a unique trinity. His good servants of the oblique way will conserve and fortify them when everybody sees a defiant Luther. And this next section is in a poetic form. I did not translate it to be poetic, but I translated it as we translated it as best we could. And the consort of nasty and damned dogs, who suffocate several by their effects, and a sea deeper, I hope, than the Tiber, because it doesn't want to plunge. Yesterday, not the whole country saw damage, so which there is now not now a design of the danger born from the Tiber, God will figure out a right way. For good right and reason, we must have descriptions of the evangelical sentence, that which is found in Mark chapter 8, that reprimands us for wanting to stay up and pray to see the punishment of time in the past, present, and future, and now those that happen in the city of Rome, chief of Christendom, where the divine punishment, or at the very least God's permission, of which to watch, inspires us to capably say. Without a fictional parable nor a dream, each of these letters of ours are a little eaten away, who we send for sure by a Rome of virtue and haughtiness. Poetic form. To the banker, as you can see, the scrupulous, if inside you hear, but don't be instinctually doubtful, the banker would be distinctly a desire to send for these news. Those who are living in illegible news. If not true, the case is obvious, illegible. Jesus, that has all our faith in him. The lords of the church and justice do not want you to be disagreeable if I infer, indeed, this misfortune and destitution, and then parentheses by illegible, that God sent, parentheses, to the knowledge of the people. It seems to me that there are many and by far more lesser and smaller deliberative ancient and modern books than these are new to see yourself ruled according to the good principle example and to root out virtue that we see the beautiful multiply. So we must exhaust with all his power to flee iniquity, that God does not punish us for our great evils, whereby often sending dread punishment to the beautiful or correction of evils. And in Latin, however, we have respect in men of God. And back to the French. Let me keep our life from doing things so we end up as in Sodom and Gomorrah, or distinctly as has happened in the city of Rome. But do not say it is vengeance, from then the 6th or the 7th of October, as a good seal by letter sent in this city of Paris by the banks from which the tenant follows. After said bankers have described the proper and necessary affairs, declares the content as follows in the letters of things that supposedly happened in Rome, dated the 19th of October, 1530, sent to my Lord Master seated at his banker's post that resides in Paris. I think my Lord, who was there during the sack of Rome, and it doesn't mention which sack, saw the great pity, what it was, but I promise you that there came to us another sack, as big a loss as the first. We were all in danger of our persons. We thought presently that it was the end of the world. We were afflicted for 2 days in our house under water, which was the same for the whole city of Rome. In the end, all of the shops were filled with water. The waters rose past the first floor of the houses, and there was a great multitude of people drowned. More in these houses were covered deep as in an abyss. Again, Many beautiful and excellent houses of Rome, like the one of Master Eusebius Julian this time, and many more beautiful houses. So says Eusebius, 18 or 20 people remain dead in their homes. It is pitiful to see this place illegible, which is all full of water and muck or mud. And Eusebius is mentioning this is just his own little neighborhood. Be sure that the city of Rome will not be cleaned in 2 months. You can know it better, especially from the people who have been there and go beyond the country, who will tell you everything in the pity that has been in Rome. Following their other letters sent from Rome, they're as entitled Letters by my Lord Banker Dulon, living in the town of Lyon, sent to my Lord Master Jehan, posted banker at the date of 19th day of October. The said banker, after declaring his affairs to said Master Jehan, posted the news of Rome that are quite piteous, that these letters say about Rome, and that it is certain that on the 8th day of said month of October the Tiber was so big and filled with water impetuously and so high that the highest sight in Rome was the mountains by the height of a lance. Our losses are larger than a sack because of all the wheat in the attics and the wines in the cellars have been lost and wasted, and more than 1,500 houses have fallen, and some still collapse daily. Thus the dead, a great multitude of people, were suffocated, including important people. The said Tiber was bigger than it ever was by 12 feet in height. Everybody started to pray, crying out for mercy, declaring that they should never die of a merciless death. And none of the astrologers foresaw that on the 8th of the month of the October the waters would be even higher than on Judgment Day. From Lyon on the last day of October, the year 1530. And here's a poem to close it all out. To the French people, let's consider the example that we see in front of our great ample. About this Tiber, hold well your illusions, which is high erected place abounds. Fear not, because God does what's best for you, but in the end punishes the young and the old. Rome would like to see 1,000 pardons, that we would like to say one time that we were taken by surprise, and that the judge took back from high and low without refuge, that the Romans fear the Tiber's deluge, universally take amendments. With God we have a roof over our head, him who is powerful and the sovereign king, and the Tiber does not bring any trouble. Amen. So what we have here, for all of you people who are out there doing mud flood research and chronological research and all those types of things, is going to be St. Gregory, the Pope. His Excellence St. Gregory, who we don't really know who the heck they're talking about, because officially this happened in 1530. The Pope that was it during, who was alive during that period of time, was Pope Clement VII. But if we go here to his fairly extensive Wikipedia page, as you can see, it's got quite a bit of information in here. There's nothing. There's not a single word about this flood. It talks about the quote supposed sack of Rome of 1527, but nothing about one of the biggest floods in the history of the city, and one that is described to be, and I quote, the end of the world. Let us not be like Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, those are pretty hefty, labels to put on something. I mean, this must have been one hell of a flood if you're talking about it being the end of the world, or Sodom and Gomorrah, or waters higher than Judgment Day, as they says at the end of this other one. I mean, that's a massive flood, and this is multiple documents that are actually describing it in that way. But we have nothing here. We have nothing. So, what's the deal? And then you can find books where they have, like, there's one book that has a story about some like jewelry maker who gets caught in the flood, and he's worried about finishing these papal jewel, doesn't want the papal Jews to wash away, so he leaves the house and blah 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 blah. But there's nothing like that. I mean, that's like one of the few things that I can find. Okay, so Pope Gregory II, who lived or his papacy began on 19th of May 715, and it ended the 11th of February, 731. Okay, so here we go. We have a small story here. Okay, about there was a flood during his time. All right, so almost immediately, Gregory began the task of preparing the walls of Rome, beginning at the Porta Tiburtina. Working on this task was delayed on October 716 when the Tiber River burst its banks and flooded Rome, causing immense damage and only receded after 8 days. Gregory ordered a number of litanies to be said to stem the flood, which spread over the Campus Martius and the so-called Plains of Nero, reaching the foot of the Capitoline Hill. Now, this sounds a lot like what we just read. Okay, going out and taking processions, quote unquote, and there's a lot of people who think the processions mean something else, and that's fine. But processions is essentially also just describing a group of people going out and doing something, and this is exactly what this just explained, is that he organized litanies, i.e., a procession. I mean, it's a change of word, but it's funny how a change of word can make such a big difference. And then, and of course, it spread all over the entire field of Mars and the plains of Nero's, and reached the foot of the Capitoline Hill. And I think that's important because we're going to go back to this document here, because it says it went up to, let's see here, the mountains. It is certain that on the 8th day of said month of October, the Tiber was so big and filled with water impetuously and so high that the highest sight in Rome was the mountains by a height of a lance. So here we are, the Capitoline Hill, which is one of the 7 hills of Rome. So let's look at the Roman Forum first. Now, the Roman Forum, has a general history of being built over time. I mean, it was an epicenter of the city for, a long time period, a very long time period. And what it says here at history.com, from the good old History Channel, I'll just read you guys a little bit of something here. So, over time, many economic and political events began to take place in more elaborate structures to the north of the Forum. The last major expansion of the Roman Forum is the Basilica of Maxentius, took place during the reign of Constantine in 312 AD. We'll take a look at that, because that building is not a small building at all. But most of the ancient buildings and sites in the Roman Forum were destroyed in 410 AD, around the time when the Roman Empire began to fall. Okay, so yeah, right. During the Middle Ages, the land that was once the great Roman Forum was reduced to a pasture for grazing animals. The area became known as Campo Vaccino, or cattle field, and was essentially an overgrown, neglected field. The Roman Forum was, quote, rediscovered, unquote, by archaeologist Carlo Fea in 1803. Excavations to clear the area took over 100 years. In fact, it wasn't fully excavated until the early 20th century, because the Romans built over earlier ruins. The remains from several centuries can be found in the Forum. So we have that, okay. And then we have this part under the Roman Forum section, I believe, of Wikipedia. And let's hear what it has to say here. Okay, this one's interesting. So the Roman Forum was a site for many artists and architects studying in Rome to sketch during the 17th through the 19th century. The focus of many of these works, produced by visiting northern artists, was on a current state of the Roman Forum, known locally as Campo Vaccino, or Cowfield, due to the livestock grazed on the largely ignored section of the city. Claude Lorrain's 1636 Campo Vaccino shows the extent to which the building in the Forum were buried under sediment. So here you go. Buried under sediment, under mud, under muck. Now, burning a city down does not cover it in dirt, okay? And that's my first major point. And one of the things I'm going to make a point on also is the fact that, this is the inside of the Pantheon here, okay? This is similar to the way the other buildings would have been. There's no wood There's no wooden structures. There's nothing to really, quote, catch on fire here. Okay, so keep that in mind because the Pantheon and these other buildings, like the Basilica Constantine Maxentius, like we just looked at, you know, they have the similar kind of building structure. You see all these things, and it's just one of those things. I don't think that this building, I mean, I don't think it burned down. I think it got ravaged by this flood that we're talking about here because these are massive buildings. This isn't a small place. And when you see the people, there's an old picture of it. Let's see if I can get a picture. Yeah, look at the difference between how small these people are. Look at that guy. Look how massive this was. Again, no wood. How would you burn this down? Everything else around here has got the same kind of like corroded structure as if it was just like ripped apart from the inside. You see that? And just like chunks of things just taken away. It's uh it's kind of impressive. Okay, and then and then you look at the forum itself and it's still covered in tons of grass. It's still, I mean, it's excavated, but still there's some parts of it that aren't quite that well excavated. And then there's other pictures where you see like just big things of grass and stuff all over the place. And they could have done a. I mean, if they said it took 100 years to excavate the place, like that's incredible. So I mean, when you look at some of the pictures that you've been seeing of Piranesi and of Hieronymus, like those might be accurate pictures of what Rome actually looked like. Okay, and then we're gonna go to the sieges of Rome, the various sieges. All right, so 410, King Alaric, he attacked, or attacked Rome and actually stormed the place. They burnt the a gate in the beginning, or the gardens of Celis are here, and which is close to the gate, and then they there are all these stories about how they came in and looted the city, but they weren't actually murdering multitudes of people, and it was a restrained kind of sack. All they were doing is just stealing, basically, for the most part. But it does say here that nor is there any reason to attribute any extensive destruction or of the buildings of the city to Alaric and his followers. The Basilica Aemilia in the Roman Forum did burn down, which perhaps can be attributed to Alaric. The archaeological evidence was provided by coins dating from 410 found melted on the floor. I'm not sure how you can date the metal and when it's melted, or you can even see the 410 or whatever, or whatever date that they used at that time period. That seems like a dubious kind of thing, and I don't see one of these deals at the end here. So we'll take a look at the basilica. Basilica looks like it was, I mean, it looks like a lot of the other buildings there, made out of decent masonry and solid masonry. I mean, again, if you burn the top of the thing, okay, but a lot of the masonry would survive. So I don't know. This might have been burned down and destroyed. Maybe it wasn't. This is obviously a 3D model, but who knows? But that is the part here on the Roman Forum, if I'm not mistaken. It's this part, if I'm not mistaken, or yeah, it's this part. Yep. So this building is like gone. So I could see maybe that this one actually did get definitely destroyed by something. I don't know. Again, if it's fire, I could possibly believe that. But here we go again. So the sack of 455. The aftermath, it is accepted that Genseric looted great amounts of treasure from the city, damaging objects of cultural significance, such as the Temple of Jupiter, by stripping away the gilt bronze roof tiles. There is, however, some debate over the severity of the Vandal attack. The sack of 455 is generally seen as being one more than the Visigothic attack of 410, because the Vandals plundered Rome for 14 days, whereas the Visigoths spent only 3 days in the city. But yet again, he kept his promise not to burn down the city and slaughtered its inhabitants. He did carry off some to be slaves, and there you go. No real destruction. Fall of Rome. the Gothic king Totila, and he'll come back in the next one too, entered in December 17th, and they cautiously advanced in the city. Many of the defenders escaped through another gate. And let's see here. People sought refuge in only 26 soldiers and 60 civilians were killed, and Rome was plundered. But Totila, who apparently intended to burn the city to sheep pasture, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? They called it a sheep pasture. Relented, however, to be torn down about 1/3 of the defense walls before leaving. Okay, there you go. So no major destruction there. Here again, he comes back. In earlier sieges, Totila had intended to destroy Rome, but once he captured the city, he decided to repopulate and rebuild it and defend it against all future attacks from Justinian. Again, no destruction. And then here we have the very lacking sack of Rome of 1084. And it claims that the Normans had mainly pillaged the old city, which was one of the richest cities in Italy, after days of unending violence. Now, again, so they're talking about this area we're talking about here, okay? The Capitoline Hill and all this, the Forum. And after days of unending violence, the Romans rose up, causing the Normans to set fire to the city. Many of the buildings of Rome were gutted in the Capitol and Palatine Hills, along with the area between Colosseum and Lateran. So gutted does not mean actually destroyed. It probably just means the roof got destroyed, or just some of the stuff. Because again, if you're looking at things like, the inside of these buildings or stuff, or like the Pantheon, for example, I mean, what are we burning here? Yeah, and that's what a lot of the insides of these places look like. So I'm not really sure what to say about that. And then you have the sack of 1527. And then after 3 days of ravages, he ordered the attacks to cease. Let's see here. Basically, this was like a free-for-all, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And they say in the very beginning of this is how it has similarities to, here we go. They entered the city of Rome and sacked it in a manner reminiscent of the barbarian pillages committed 1,100 years earlier. So if we're doing our Scaligerian chronology 1,000-year jump, adding a couple hundred years, or subtracting a couple hundred years, this is kind of an interesting. These are interesting correlations here, and and supposedly they were both German and also I think Spanish as well, and that ended up sacking the city. So it's here you go. Again, not huge major destruction, mostly just sacking. The Great Fire of Rome, which I again should have probably put in the beginning here, that this did destroy a lot of the city, but I think it was a lot of the peasantry, a lot of that kind of stuff, because a bunch of the Roman Forum hadn't even supposedly been completed at this point. But even so, it says here it also destroyed in the fire was a portion of the Forum where the Roman senators lived and worked. So there you go. It destroyed part of a building, which I'm sure that they rebuilt. So I mean, no big deal there. And here we go, covered in sediment, as they say. Again, they took 100 years to excavate. You imagine how high the dirt might have been for this? I wonder if they I guess if you guys poke around looking at old pictures of the Roman Forum, look for mud marks or something. Maybe they cleaned it all up. It looks like it's nice and clean, doesn't it? Because if it took 100 years to excavate the Roman Forum, I mean that's pretty crazy. All right, so then we're gonna move over to the popes here, and the document mentions Pope Gregory, Saint Pope Gregory, which is strange. And this one lived in his papacy was 1715 to 1731. So again, with the Scaligerian chronology jumps, you take off 1,000 years and add on 200, and there you go. All right, so we have Pope Gregory II, and he supposedly lived during the Roman conquest, it seems, if I'm not mistaken here. How about that? How about that? So, isn't that interesting? Here is another. So, this is 500 years before the supposed flood, the Roman conquest, and supposedly the destruction of Rome. We have another Pope Gregory happens to live at the same time. His papacy ended the exact time as the quote unquote Norman conquest. That is very interesting. So there we go. That's an interesting connection because we don't know exactly which Gregory they're talking about. And we have to go by whatever information we have. And I know I'm using Wikipedia, which is not, I know I'm using Wikipedia, which is not the greatest source, but it's a good jump off point to be able to connect and show how so many things are, working themselves out here. And this is very interesting to me. So we have that connection. We have then Pope Gregory the Eighth, whose papacy was 1572 to 1585. So just after, not long after the supposed flood of 1530, if it was indeed 1530 and not I 530 or 530 itself. And he is an important person because he's the one who created the Gregorian calendar, which that as soon as this happened, the next year was when Scaliger put out his book. And so you have the brand new calendar in which we follow today, which is based on a new chronology written at the same exact time by Josephus Scaliger, and the Gregorian calendar comes out in what was it, 18? Let's take a look here. It came out in 1582, and Scaliger's very first book on historical chronology came out in 1583. I don't think that is a mistake in any way, shape, or form, and I just want to point that out. Okay, so there's that. There's all these Gregories, and here we see the timeline people messing around with the time again, and now we have we run on this calendar, guys. And so understand that our entire historical chronology is based off of Jesuits who created a chronology, and then and that came out right after this new time period in which they can then start to change all kinds the of the dates of things. And they did it in the 1500s because one of the things is that you don't really find a whole lot of books that are before the 1500s. And I would suggest that anything after 1582 or 1583, it would have been copied or changed as far as date wise, or in any books that were copied and then their dates were changed themselves. So just something to think about here because with the Flamenco's new chronology, this is a big clue. So here we have Eusebius. I mentioned in the documents, both documents. One of them is called Eusebius Julian. I'm not really sure exactly, how that works exactly. And let's just keep in mind that we don't know when any of these people really truly died. I think so. Let's just keep that in mind because many of the Eusebiuses I'm going to show you guys all kind of lived at the exact same time of each other, and they sort of cross pollinate. So, and some of them or definitely seem to be different people, but are they? I'll leave that up to you. So we have here Eusebius, okay, born supposedly 260, 265, died between supposedly 339 to 340. Um, Keep that in mind. 339, 340 is when he died. He's important because he is known to be the father of church history. Here we go. And he produced his big work, Ecclesiastical History. And on the life of Pamphilus and Chronicles on the Martyrs, which were big works and something that was the basis for our early quote unquote history. So here again we're dealing with another chronologer, another historian, and that's important to pay attention to. Okay, and he spent his life writing what the life of Constantine, which he wrote as usually shortly after the emperor's death in 337. And so one of the interesting things about him is that, so again, we went on, the father of early historical Christianity. All right, so we're going to go to this Eusebius, who doesn't have any kind of stuff, says he died at 361. All right, was a high-ranking officer in the Roman Empire, holding the position of Prepositus Sacri Cubiculi for all the rule of Emperor Constantius II, 337 to 361. So again, anyways, this emperor here um, overlaps this Eusebius, and this Eusebius overlaps that Eusebius, and he supposedly died in 361. So, and here it says the Emperor Julian set up the Chalcedon tribunal to judge all those offenders of Constantius who had been suspected of corrupt conduct, and in particular, and Eusebius was accused of plotting against Gallus and was found guilty and put to death. So, there you go. Supposedly died in 361. Apparently, he was somebody who definitely was playing the game between emperor and pope. So here Eusebius was sent by Constantius II to talk to Pope Liberius, and then attended the meeting between the emperor and pope. And there you go. And then so here they're talking about help those Arian bishops who plotted against Athanasius in Alexandria. Now the Arian part of this is, I'm going to probably cover this in a whole different video, but it's very interesting how during this period of time in the 360s, supposedly, whatever, okay, I'm thinking this is, we're going to talk early times and the later times. So this is sort of the earlier time period that this flood might be associated with, because of just the mention of the different people here. So you have Eusebius, you have this issue with the Arian type of style going on here, but in the 1500s you also have the exact same sort of, not exact same sort of issue, but you have very similar situations of religious divisionism that is splitting Christianity. And so that is one of those things, and if you haven't watched my historical parallelism video yet, you should definitely check that out. But that's one of those things that we're going to do here. We're going to show these parallels in history and show that they may not, one of them might be made up and the other one, or they might be a mixture of the same thing, type of stuff, So here we go. We're going to go to the next Eusebius, Eusebius of Nicodemia, and he died in 341. So another, a year. And let's see here. He was the man who baptized Constantine the Great. And there was the Bishop of Bertus, modern day Beirut in Phoenicia. He was later made the Bishop of Nicodemia, where the imperial court resided. And so he lived in supposedly Constantinople from 338 to his death. Now, I think it's interesting. So again, he's dealing with Arius and the Arian part, okay, living at the same time, and is a one of the people who was involved in this debate. And so he was described by modern historians as an ambitious intriguer and a consummate political player. He's also described by ancient sources as a high-handed person who was also aggressive in his dealings. He also used his allies to spy on his opponents. So, I mean, and then here we go, Athanasius again. So we have crossing yet again with more Eusebiuses. Eusebius Consul, 359. Was a Roman senator who was a brother-in-law of Emperor Constantius II. So here we go again, and here we go again with the same time period. All these Eusebiuses. And then here's the last Eusebius, the Bishop of Samosata. And maybe this is just one of those things where there's a lot of Eusebiuses at the same time. But it's funny how all these guys are all related to the same kind of areas. You got Antioch again. You have Constantius II again. You have Julian the Apostate. So again, Eusebius Julian. Who could it be? Who could it be? Right? All right. So then we have Eusebius of Rome, the founder of the Church of Esquine Hill in Rome that bears his name, is listed in the Roman Martyrology as one of the saints venerated on August 14th. And let's see here. Um, it says here that Eusebius, a priest and ardent defender of the Nicene Creed, publicly preached against both Pope and Emperor, branding them as heretics. When the Orthodox party who supported the anti-Pope Felix were excluded from all the churches, Eusebius continued to say Mass in his own house. He was arrested, brought before Liberius and Constantius, again the same people, and boldly reproved Liberius for deserting the Catholic faith. In consequence, he was placed in a dungeon 4 feet wide, or was imprisoned in his own house. Oh, why don't you make up your mind, Wikipedia? Where he spent his first time in prayer and died after 7 months. His body was buried in the cemetery. The simple inscriptions, Eusebio homini die. No, so here we go. You know, this is interesting. So this act of kindness was performed by two priests, Gregory Osorius, a friend of Eusebius, and Gregory was put in the same prison and also died there. And he was buried by Orosius, who professes to be the writer of the Acts. Interesting. So, 357 here, 4th century, writer of the Acts. That's, that's not sure what to think about that. Obviously, all these dates are the chronology of Scaliger that they are obviously basing all these things on. So here we go. That's it. I mean, what can I say other than, in conclusion, I think the Great Roman Flood of 1530 or I 530 is something we should consider as the possible true destruction of the old part of the city. And I mean, it's not a mistake when they talks about how 1,500 houses fell and that there was debris everywhere. And I mean, I don't know. I always wondered how something like this could get destroyed when there's so many other, I mean, a lot of these other buildings are older, but these buildings are not. These aren't small. These are not small buildings, and as I was showing you before, the idea of burning all these buildings down when they look like this, and like that, and like this, what are you burning exactly? If this is all stone, then how are you catching this on fire? Really? And that's the thing. I think this city was truly destroyed by a flood, and that these two documents right here, translated for you guys by us, really pokes some huge holes in the story of the destructions of Rome, and we have to consider the time periods that we're talking about here. So there's a lot of interconnecting things, okay? If you're looking at the 300s, the mid 300 periods, okay, that's 1,000 years minus 200 years, okay? And you have religious strife, you have religious divisionism across all kinds of different places, in both the 1500s and during the 300s, okay? You have sacks not long before the flood in both cases, okay? You have many, many, many different types of Pope Gregories that all happen to be within the 1,200 or time period. So Gregory the Second was 700s, 1,000 to 1,000 minus or 200, and then he fits into that. The second Pope Gregory was during the Norman Conquest, and that's just 500 beforehand, with not too much information. I have a feeling that one is the fake one. And then and then we have the Gregory the Eighth, who created our calendar and was the progenitor of what ended up becoming our whole chronological style and how we refer to our time and everything. And the year after that, Scaliger puts out his famous work of chronology and starting the whole ball rolling. And that's why this is part one of a series I'm going to be continuing to do called Everything Changed in the 1500s. And so, if you guys like our video, and you liked all the research that we brought to you and all the connecting points, please feel free to hit the like button and please subscribe because I got a bunch more. We have a bunch more translation projects and other things to add on to prove that the 1500s is when everything changed. And subscribe, hit the little bell. Please share this out because I think logic to me says that this was more of a flood than it was anything other kind of destruction. Yeah, things may have burned, but the flood really did the number, really did the rest of it. Because when you see these depictions that were only made 20 years after this flood of quote unquote 1530, you see how covered everything is. And if it took 100 years to excavate, I think those depictions are legit. And when you look at pictures of all this grass and everything all over the place, they didn't bother even taking the rest of it out. So, you know, think what you will, and appreciate you guys joining me today. And if you'd like to, give us a tip or support us financially, we have our PayPal and Patreon links in the description box. So, thank you, everyone, for joining me, and we will see you in the next video, which will be about the St. Felix flood and some other incredible translations that happened only 1 month after this. See you next time.